You think you're being overlooked. You think people just don't value loyalty, kindness, or effort anymore. But what if you're not being ignored? What if you're being silently judged for something you never realized you were doing? Stay with this because it flips in the final section. Respect isn't given. That's what we're told. You have to earn it. Show that you're dependable. Be the one who stays late, shows up early, listens without interrupting, carries what others ignore. And if you do all of that without complaint, then maybe, just maybe, they'll see you. So you adapt. You stop asking to be met. You lower your voice. You play the role that makes other people comfortable. And slowly, you start trading pieces of yourself for the hope that someone else will keep score. That trade becomes a way of living. You don't speak your boundaries, you hint. You don't share your needs, you suppress them. And you don't demand space, you wait to be offered it. It looks like patience, but it's performance. At first, you think it's working. People keep you around, they trust you, they say you're easy to be with. But under that surface harmony is a tension that never resolves. Because you weren't trying to be liked. You were trying to be safe. You learned that respect comes from effort. But what you were really taught is this: don't make people uncomfortable. Don't be a burden. Don't stand in your full self because that's too much. So you hide your ambition. You downplay your emotions. You make sure no one ever has to deal with you. That's the real belief behind the transactional self. I'll earn my value by reducing my impact. But people don't respect absence. They don't admire containment. They don't trust someone who's always agreeable because they can feel it's not real. And when you're always bending to accommodate, they never meet your center because you never asked them to. What started as a strategy for approval becomes a slow erosion of identity. You become the person others can use, but never really know. And eventually, they stop seeing you entirely. Not out of cruelty, out of calibration. They've learned you'll always be there. You've taught them not to look closer. This is what Nietzsche saw in moral systems built on denial. A man taught to repress his will doesn't become good. He becomes invisible. He's told that suffering makes him worthy, that obedience is strength, that if he stays quiet long enough, he'll be chosen. But there is no reward. There is no judge keeping score. And by the time you realize that, you've already given the best parts of yourself to people who never asked for them. The real betrayal isn't that they don't respect you. It's that you don't respect you. Because every time you suppress your truth to stay useful, you confirm the deeper belief. I don't deserve to exist on my own terms. That's what needs to break. And it won't happen by giving more. It begins when you stop performing value and start becoming undeniable. But that shift has a cost. Because the moment you stop trading effort for belonging, you lose the illusion that made you feel safe. And that's where we go next. There's a moment, quiet and unspoken, when a man stops expressing and starts performing. It happens slowly. You show up a little more polished. You calculate your reactions. You anticipate what version of you they want, and you hand it over before they even ask. You're not lying, but you're not present either, because somewhere along the line you stopped acting from center and started building from reaction. Not, what do I want to express, but what will make me acceptable in this room? And in that shift, the real you goes missing. We don't recognize performance as a threat because it feels safe. It's controlled, strategic. It protects you from rejection because the version they're rejecting isn't fully real. But safety isn't presence, and control isn't confidence. You can't be respected if no one can find you. This is why so many men feel invisible in spaces where they're doing everything right. They're being kind, calm, measured, generous, and yet no one moves toward them. No one mirrors their loyalty. No one gives what they give because there's something missing beneath the actions. Substance, not charm, not intelligence, not polish. Substance. You can feel it when someone's centered. They don't need to speak loudly. They don't over-explain. They don't adjust themselves mid-sentence to make you more comfortable. They're there, rooted, non-negotiating. And that's what you've been replacing with performance, hoping it will look the same from the outside. But it never does. Because presence isn't cosmetic. It doesn't bend. It doesn't seek permission. This is where the emotional debt begins to build. The more you perform, the more exhausted you become. Not from effort, but from fragmentation. You're constantly switching roles. Around her, you're the rock. Around him, the mirror. At work, the quiet grinder. At home, maybe nothing at all. None of them are lies, but none of them are whole. And every time you wear one too long, the rest of you withers. What starts as social intelligence becomes emotional exile. You're no longer sure what's real. You just know what works. And when it stops working, you blame yourself. Not for betraying your truth, but for failing to perform better. That's the loop. The more unseen you feel, the more you perform. The more you perform, the more unseen you become. It's not just exhausting. It's identity erosion dressed up as success. Nietzsche didn't just warn against obedience. He warned against the man who has no voice except in contrast to expectation, who becomes what others need him to be and disappears the moment those needs change. That's the quiet death of will. Respect, real respect, only begins when the performance ends, because what people respond to isn't what you offer, it's what you embody without compromise. You don't earn that through effort. You earn it by no longer negotiating your reality. Because when you stop performing, you don't disappear. You appear, but that's also when something darker surfaces. You realize how many people were never really with you. They were just responding to your role. And now that the role is gone, so are they. That's when the question creeps in, was I ever truly respected? Or just tolerated while useful? It's easy to believe they just don't see you. You tell yourself it's because you're not loud enough, not flashy enough, not dramatic enough. You think the world only respects dominance, so maybe you need to posture more, speak harder, fight louder. But it's not volume you're missing. It's not power, charisma, or presence. It's clarity. Because the way you move, the way you give, the way you wait, the way you don't ask, carries an echo, a subtle hum beneath every action that says, please see me, please make me real. And people can feel it. They might not know what's off. They just know that something's being asked of them, something they never agreed to carry. So they pull back, not because they hate you, but because your presence asks them to give something they don't know how to name. This is the part no one teaches you. Unacknowledged need is heavy, even when it's polite, even when it's noble, even when you never say a word. Especially then, you've built your entire identity around not needing too much. You've trained yourself to be low maintenance, to anticipate disappointment and shrink your expectations before they even form. But the people around you can feel that fracture. They sense the effort you're making not to burden them, and it makes them uneasy because real connection doesn't require negotiation. It's not your silence they reject. It's the invisible contract woven into it. You think your restraint is virtuous. You think your quiet proves you're not like the others. You think the way you endure will one day be noticed, rewarded, chosen. But beneath that silence is a question you never ask directly. Will you give me the respect I refuse to give myself? That's why they leave. Not because you're too much, but because you've made them responsible for a wound they didn't create. Nietzsche called this the man of reaction, the one who doesn't act from selfhood, but from reflection. He doesn't speak to express. He speaks to test the room. He doesn't take up space. He studies the rules and then tries to break them gently. But no one respects a man who isn't anchored. They may pity him. They may use him, but they won't stay with him, because staying would mean standing in the gravity of his unresolved pain. And most people are still avoiding their own. You want to be chosen, but you've built an identity that disappears as soon as someone stops mirroring it. And when that mirror vanishes, so do you. That's not dismissal, that's recognition. They're not rejecting your character, they're responding to the absence of it. Because what you've offered them, quiet loyalty, thoughtful patience, gentle endurance, was never backed by authorship. It was compensation. And compensation always carries a debt. Even if you never say it out loud, that debt is what they're backing away from, not you, just the weight of your unspoken hope. And the truth is, you felt it first. Now the question isn't, why don't they respect me? It's what part of me still believes I need to be emptied before I'm worthy. That's where we go next. You were taught that strength is silence, not the grounded kind, not the kind that commands space by being centered, but the brittle kind, held together by tension and unspoken terms. Early on, you learned that showing too much made things worse. So instead of sharing, you adjusted. You cleaned up your expression, measured your tone, concealed what made you feel real. You didn't become calm. You became unreadable. At first, it worked. People called you composed, easy to be around, controlled, but they weren't drawn to your center. They were relieved by your absence. That's the cost of withholding. You start to think that the less you show, the more people will trust you. But trust doesn't form around emptiness. It forms when people can feel the weight of something that doesn't move. You're not anchoring them, you're avoiding them. And in that avoidance, something essential begins to distort. You don't come across as powerful, you come across as filtered. And filtering erodes connection long before anyone notices it consciously. They won't know why they're pulling back. Only that something about your presence feels quiet but heavy, like a room with all the windows closed. This isn't strength, it's compression. And compression without release doesn't make you stable, it makes you unreachable. Nietzsche understood this kind of self-betrayal, the kind that builds control not from confidence, but from containment. He warned that when identity is shaped to protect you from pain, it slowly turns into the very thing that ensures you'll never be known. Because no one meets the version of you that never speaks from its center. They meet your edits, your polish, your restraint, not your presence. And once people learn they can't feel you, they stop trying to reach you. Not as punishment, as instinct. There's something deeper waiting beneath that performance, but it won't surface through control. It surfaces the moment you stop needing to appear finished. Not the moment you're finally impressive, but the moment you're finally intact. You've spent years trying to be enough for people who never asked you to. And that's the most disorienting part. Realizing you weren't rejected because you were weak or flawed or too emotional. You were rejected because your value came with conditions. Because every kindness had a quiet return address. Because everything you gave still needed to be received to feel real. You weren't loving them. You were auditioning for wholeness. You tried to earn respect by earning roles: helper, listener, rescuer. You thought that if you showed how useful you were, they'd make you permanent. But that's not how value works. That's how dependency hides. And the truth is brutal. If someone only treats you with care when you're making their life easier, then they don't see you. They see function. And you helped build that, because every time you avoided directness, every time you gave to avoid being forgotten, every time you adjusted your shape to be more digestible, you sent a message. I don't trust that I can exist here unless I perform my way into acceptance. But presence isn't conditional, and respect doesn't grow in negotiation. It appears the moment you stop trying to become valuable and start acting as if your value was never up for discussion. That's the real turning point. Not a breakthrough of emotion, a break with identity. The moment you stop asking, what do I need to be in this room? And start asking, What part of me refuses to leave even when no one looks? Because the self you're trying to earn has always been waiting, not to be constructed, to be remembered. And remembering isn't loud. It doesn't fight for attention. It doesn't plead for reassurance. It simply stops bending. That's when people feel it. Not the version of you they used to mold, but the version that walks in and doesn't need to be mirrored to feel real. That's not arrogance, that's authorship, and it carries a weight that can't be imitated. Once you stop asking others to confirm your worth, you become someone they can't reduce. Not because they changed, but because you did. The performance ended, and in its absence, something irreversible begins. Not the rise of a new self, but the return of the one you abandoned trying to be chosen. That's who they finally feel, not because they're ready to receive you, but because you stopped waiting for them to be. They might never change how they treat you. Even after you reclaim your voice, stop performing and anchor into something real, some people will still look at you through the same old lens. They'll still expect you to fold, to yield, to carry weight that isn't yours. And when you don't, you'll feel it. The silence, the distance, the way their affection starts to thin out once you stop negotiating for it. That's when you'll realize how much of your old life was built on quiet transactions. How many of your relationships were never with you, just with the version of you they could lean on without having to look too closely. And the more solid you become, the more those structures fall away. Not because you failed, but because they were never real enough to survive your return. There's grief in that, the grief of no longer being chosen because you stopped collapsing in the way they needed you to. The grief of not being missed when you finally choose yourself. But underneath that loss is something new. Not relief, not pride, just a stillness that doesn't waver when someone disapproves. That's what self-respect actually feels like. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to be earned, explained, or performed. It simply is. Unshaken, unbothered, unnegotiated. And when you walk into the world from that place, you stop asking people to validate your presence. You stop wondering what they're thinking. You stop adjusting your posture based on how much room they're willing to give. Because now you're the one defining the space. Not through dominance, through non-reliance. And that kind of presence makes people feel something they can't explain. Some will respect it, some will resent it, but none of them will be able to ignore it. Because you're no longer asking for permission. You're no longer explaining your worth, or managing your tone, or softening your truth to avoid tension. You're just there, without apology, without proof, without the need to be tolerated. So here's the fracture. What would happen if you never tried to be respected again? What if you lived like it was already yours? And what would that cost you besides everything you were never meant to keep?